There's an almost imperceptible moment when something inside you shifts, and that's where it all begins. It's not an explosion, nor a cinematic epiphany. It's a silent fissure, a sudden feeling that the life you've lived until now no longer fits in the same place. Alan Watts used to say that awakening rarely comes with warnings. It seeps through the cracks of consciousness like a cold draft of air passing through an old house. You feel it before you understand it, and when you feel it, you know that something has changed forever. This initial impact is not gentle. It can come on any given morning, while you're brushing your teeth, or in the middle of a casual conversation, when your words sound strange, almost empty. It can arise in the solitude of traffic, in the boredom of a repetitive routine, or the moment you look around and realize that everyone seems perfectly adapted to a pattern that suddenly you can no longer follow. Why does this happen? Why do some remain comfortably asleep while others are ripped from their zone of tranquility by a force they can't even name? Watts would say that this initial discomfort is the first wake-up call, the sign that the personality structure, built with so much effort over the years, has begun to crack from within. And perhaps the most frightening thing is realizing that you didn't ask for it. You didn't wake up saying, "I want to change," but something inside you decided that it was no longer possible to live the same way. This is where the process reveals itself to be dangerous, not because of the external world, but because of everything you might lose internally. Identities, certainties, bonds, roles that seemed eternal. How can you accept that what once defined you now seems too narrow? Watts compared this moment to that of a lobster, which, as it grows, needs to shed its rigid shell. While it wears it, it is protected. But as it grows, this protection becomes a prison. To continue living, it needs to break through and expose its soft flesh to the depths of the ocean. The question he posed, always with that ironic smile, was simple and direct. How many people prefer to keep the old shell until they suffocate inside it, just to avoid facing the vulnerability of growing up? This process isn't comfortable, and you feel it immediately. There's no glory in the first stage. There's confusion, strangeness, a feeling of displacement that no one else seems to notice. You look around and everyone remains stuck on the same worries: money, status, routine, other people's opinions. While you try to understand when these things stopped making sense to you. Have you gone crazy? Are you going too far? Why does everything suddenly seem so artificial? Tension builds as you try to go on with your life normally, but realize you can no longer play the same character. Something has fallen, the mask has slipped, and no matter how hard you try to put it back on, it no longer fits your face. Watts said that this is the most critical moment, because the natural impulse is to resist, to pretend nothing happened, to return to the old shell and believe that this unease will pass. But it doesn't pass, it returns, it persists. It manifests itself in minute details, sometimes uncomfortable, other times completely disturbing. You begin to observe yourself more closely. You notice your automatic reactions, your repetitive thoughts, the way you try to fit into patterns that no longer serve you. And the question that can change everything arises: if I am not what I always thought I was, then who am I? Watts always emphasized that this question does not seek a rational answer, but an inner disposition, that of facing the unknown. And that is precisely where the danger lies. Because by questioning who you are, you automatically question everything that keeps your life structured: your relationships, your values, even your vision of reality. This initial shock doesn't have to be dramatic, but it is profound. You begin to notice expressions, conversations, habits, and beliefs that you previously accepted without question. Now, every detail seems laden with meaning. The feeling is one of strangeness in the face of a world you knew with your eyes closed. And yet, it's as if you're seeing everything for the first time. It's an uncomfortable but inevitable awakening. Something inside you wants to move forward, even if it moves forward blindly. At the same time, there is fear. The fear of losing what you have. The fear of not knowing where this will lead. The fear of being alone. The fear of discovering that perhaps your entire past was just preparation for something you didn't ask for. Watts knew this and often reminded us that it's not the awakening that hurts, but the resistance to it. The pain lies in trying to hold on to what is falling, in trying to preserve what no longer has any support. Anguish arises when you try to remain small within a space that has already expanded. And then comes the final tension of this first stage. You feel something calling you beyond the known, but you don't know which direction to take. You feel that something within you needs to die so that something greater can exist, but you don't know exactly what is dying. Everything is suspended. Everything is in transition. Watts described this point as the edge of the inner cliff, that place where there is no turning back but also no visible ground ahead. It is the threshold, the half-open door, the real beginning of the crossing, and as disconcerting as it is to admit, part of you already knows there's no going back. The old life continues around you like a familiar backdrop, but you no longer belong to it in the same way. Change has begun, and even if you don't know where it leads, you feel the silent urge to move forward. But before advancing, you need to face what this transformation truly demands, and that inevitably begins with the next step in this journey. There's a moment, right after the first internal rupture, when something even deeper begins to happen. You realize it's not just you who has changed. It's as if the world itself has shifted a few millimeters to the side, revealing a layer that was always there, but that you had never noticed. Alan Watts said that this is the instant when you begin to see through the cracks, when the solid and organized world loses some of its rigidity, and reality begins to seem more malleable, more symbolic, almost as if it were responding directly to your inner state. The curious thing is that this doesn't arrive in a mystical or grandiose way. Often, it arises in trivial situations, so everyday that you almost doubt they have any importance. Imagine, for example, sitting at the breakfast table with your family. Everyone talks about work, bills, appointments, practical matters, but you feel the conversation flows at a strange pace, as if the depths of the world are operating at a different frequency. While others discuss, you observe the movement of hands, the clatter of spoons on glasses, the repetition of phrases, and you notice something that has always been there. Everyone is trapped in an automatic cycle, repeating patterns without realizing it. This moment, so simple and so common, creates a feeling of displacement within you. It's not arrogance, it's not contempt, it's simply the clear perception that you are no longer living within the same pact that others follow. Or perhaps it happens on public transport. A man sitting next to you complains about life, the government, the traffic, the heat. Each sentence seems like an echo of thousands you've already heard. But that morning, something in the way he speaks sparks a profound reflection. Why is everyone so certain about everything? Why do we talk as if we know exactly how the world works, when we can barely understand ourselves? You look around and see dozens of tired faces, each trapped in a rigid and unquestioned narrative. It is at this moment that reality begins to feel strange. Watts said that this is the first sign that you are seeing beyond cultural frameworks, realizing that most of what we call truth is just custom. This is the period when you start questioning things that never even crossed your mind before. Why do we desire what we desire? Where do our ambitions come from? How many of our dreams are truly our own? You watch someone striving for status and feel a silent discomfort. You see another person collecting small pleasures to try and fill a void that only grows, and you recognize that you yourself have tried this strategy countless times. But now something has changed. You can see the mechanism behind the pursuit, and the more you see, the harder it becomes to pretend you don't see. Many people, upon arriving here, try to resist. They try to convince themselves that it's just a phase, a tiredness, an emotional instability, but this justification doesn't last long. The vision doesn't regress. Watts compared this to understanding a magic trick. Once you discover how it works, the old charm never returns. The difference is that in this case, the trick isn't in the magician, but in your own perception of the world. And suddenly you start to see things that nobody talks about. You begin to notice contradictions in human behavior, inconsistencies in society, flaws in systems that everyone treats as untouchable. You realize that many people live within a structure they never stop to question, because questioning would mean risking the emotional stability built with so much fear. This is where the first unexpected twist occurs. While you feel increasingly lucid, you also begin to feel a kind of disorientation. How can someone see so clearly and, at the same time, feel that everything has become more nebulous? Watts said that this happens because, when you step outside the collective consensus, you lose the comfort of the ready-made narrative. The world ceases to be a set of answers and becomes a vast field of questions. And this change is so profound that, even in the common actions of daily life, you feel as if you are traversing a vaster reality, full of layers that move silently around you. The tension increases when you realize you can't share this with just anyone. You even try, You make a subtle comment, ask a different question, try to start a less superficial conversation, but you often receive confused looks, empty answers, or a sudden change of subject. It's not that others don't want to understand, it's that they don't yet have the internal space for that kind of perception. And this creates a strange feeling of isolation, even when surrounded by people. It's as if you've started speaking a new language, and although you continue to pronounce the same words, they no longer fit the same meaning as before. In the midst of this process, you begin to notice things about yourself that you had never observed before. Automatic reactions that previously went unnoticed now seem clearly programmed. Small irritations, habits, impulses, everything becomes more visible, almost exaggerated. It's as if an internal spotlight has been turned on, illuminating parts of the mind that were always in the shadows. And the question arises again: if I can observe these impulses and thoughts as if they were things separate from me, then who am I at the center of all this? The strangeness grows when you realize that even in the simplest decisions, something inside you is questioning the why. Why do you say yes to certain things? Why do you say no to others? Why do you feel the need to please? Why are you so afraid of disappointing? Where did this image of who you should be come from? Watts insisted that this questioning is not a sign of crisis. It is a sign of awareness. The problem is that too much awareness arising too quickly can shake the structures that gave stability to your daily life. And then, without warning, a second unexpected twist occurs. What once seemed so solid begins to look like a constructed scenario, not false, but insufficient. You feel that there is something beyond, a kind of deep layer of reality that doesn't easily reveal itself. And even without knowing exactly what is there, you feel you need to move forward. It's as if an invisible door is ajar at the back of your perception, calling you to cross over. But to move forward, you need to see something even more uncomfortable, something that only reveals itself in the next step of this journey. Something curious begins to happen when you cross that second threshold. It's not the world that moves away from you. It's the people who seem to shift to a plane you can no longer reach with the same ease. It's as if, suddenly, each relationship is illuminated by a new light, revealing small details that were always there, but that you had never noticed. Alan Watts said that when consciousness changes, even silence changes its texture. And it is precisely this silent change that inaugurates the most delicate phase of the journey, the distancing that happens effortlessly, without decision, almost like a natural law operating on its own. You begin to notice that old conversations no longer evoke anything, that old emotional cycles have lost their ability to hold your attention, that certain relationships that once seemed light now appear dense, tiring, and exhausting. It's not judgment. It's not superiority, it's not rejection. It's simply an incompatibility of frequencies that reveals itself gradually and inevitably. This distance intensifies when you observe people close to you reacting to the same old situations as if nothing has changed, while something inside you no longer accepts those automatic responses. You find yourself silent in moments when you would previously speak a lot, and speaking too much when everyone around you prefers to ignore the depth of what you are trying to express. Then arises the feeling that there is an invisible barrier, a thin film separating you from those you love. You remain there, present, physically close, but internally you feel that you no longer share the same logic. And here a doubt is born that corrodes your thoughts for days. How to remain connected to those you love when you no longer see the world through the same window. The tension intensifies when you realize that certain people interpret your change as coldness, arrogance, or disinterest. Not because you've become cold, but because you no longer participate in the emotional game that once fueled those relationships. It's a silent, almost painful shock to realize that inner evolution can be interpreted as abandonment. The inevitable question arises: to what extent should you adapt in order not to lose those who matter? And to what extent does adapting mean betraying yourself? The first unexpected break occurs when you realize that it's not just you who has changed. The way your environment reacts to you also changes. People who were once close begin to feel uncomfortable with your silence. Some try to pull you back into the old persona you played. Others begin to distance themselves, not out of resentment, but because your presence awakens questions they don't want to ask. Watts used to say that many don't fear the truth. They fear the change that the truth demands. And when you begin to represent that change, even without saying a word, it creates a field of discomfort around you. This is where something few admit emerges. Spiritual growth can generate guilt. Guilt for no longer being able to sustain certain conversations. Guilt for no longer feeling the same enthusiasm for old friendships. Guilt for realizing you no longer fit into the spaces where you once fit perfectly. The guilt intensifies when you try to force smiles or old reactions just to maintain harmony. But the more you try, the more evident the dissonance becomes. And the question that echoes is almost cruel. How many versions of yourself are you willing to sacrifice to avoid hurting anyone? The next breakthrough comes unexpectedly, almost like a small, everyday revelation. You're on a casual date, perhaps talking to someone you were once very close to, and you realize that as the person speaks, you see layers behind their words. Fears, needs, repetitions, conditioning. It's not judgment, it's insight. And this insight, once awakened, operates like a lens that can never be discarded. But at the same time, noticing these layers makes you realize that the conversation is no longer happening only on a superficial level. While the other person talks about the weather, the traffic, or some routine problem, you understand that there is a deep, unspoken discomfort there. And the question appears like a sharp blade: how to dialogue with someone stuck at a level where you can no longer remain. This is where true loneliness begins. It's not about being physically alone. It's about being internally alone, even when surrounded by people. It's realizing that you can't share your discoveries without being misunderstood, ridiculed, or treated as someone out of touch with reality. But Watts offered a consolation. No one who discovers depth can ever breathe shallowly again. This phrase resonates as a subtle reminder that loneliness is part of the journey, not a mistake along the way. But still, you wonder, how long will this feeling of displacement last? The third unexpected turn of events happens when someone close to you confronts you directly. It could be a friend saying you're too different, a family member saying you complicate everything, or someone insinuating you're getting too big for your britches. That hurts, not because it's true, but because it reveals that your inner change is being viewed through the filter of the other person's insecurity. Watts said that when an individual changes, the group tries to restore balance by attacking the piece that's out of the ordinary. It's as if the social system instinctively responds to your shift, and the question becomes inevitable. Is it worth continuing to regress just to keep those who aren't willing to move forward? Over time, you realize something even more intriguing. Certain bonds aren't broken by conflict but by silence. The distance grows slowly, in the subtext, in the unspoken intervals, until one day you realize that the relationship is still there, but it's no longer alive. And the strangest thing is that, although painful, this no longer surprises you, because you begin to understand that some connections existed only to sustain a you that has already died. And without you realizing it, a new question begins to form, softly but constantly. If so many relationships dissolve when you awaken, what remains after this process? The answer is not yet clear, but you feel that something, or someone, awaits ahead. A new stage, a new form of connection, a new kind of belonging. But to reach it, you must traverse the next phase of the journey, where darkness becomes the master and reveals what you are not yet ready to admit. There's a stage in the journey where everything seems to slow down, as if time becomes dense, almost viscous, trapping your inner movements. It's the period when you realize you no longer belong to the previous world, but you haven't found the next one either. Alan Watts said that this crossing is like walking down a dark corridor, where the walls move silently, altering how you perceive each thought, each emotion, each memory. This is where the true inner night begins, the one where you don't fight external monsters, but everything you believed yourself to be until that moment. And the most impressive thing is that, often this process begins in completely ordinary, even banal situations, revealing the silent power of transformation. Perhaps you're in a supermarket, standing in front of a shelf, and suddenly a strange feeling arises, as if you were seeing life through a glass. People hurry by, grab products, check prices, repeat mechanical gestures. But you, for some inexplicable reason, realize that you are there physically, and at the same time completely detached from the collective rhythm. Watts called this the feeling of witnessing, the moment when you cease to be merely a character and become the observer. It's a dizzying sensation because it forces you to recognize that much of what you experienced before was automatic. But what is most disconcerting is the question that arises: how to return to being who you were after realizing that you were living as if on autopilot. This intermediate state brings curious, almost improbable events. There are reports of people who, at this stage, begin to find coincidences so specific that they seem like coded messages. A number that repeats itself on clocks, license plates, and documents. A phrase that appears in different places on the same day. An unknown person saying something that answers a silent question you've been carrying for weeks. Some call it synchronicity, others coincidence. Watts said that this type of event is not divine intervention, but a natural effect of a mind that has finally become capable of perceiving patterns it previously ignored. But the emotional impact can be so intense that it seems almost supernatural. At the same time, a strange feeling of loss arises. It's not the loss of an object or someone, it's an internal loss, as if pieces of your old identity were silently crumbling away. You notice this in small actions. You stop getting irritated by things that used to keep you awake at night. You lose interest in discussions that used to consume you. You abandon old opinions that you defended as absolute truths. All of this provokes a paradoxical feeling, because while it brings relief, it also awakens an uncomfortable doubt. Who am I becoming? It is at this point that unexpected situations arise that test your stability. A sudden conflict at work, a seemingly pointless family argument, a plan that inexplicably goes wrong. You try to understand why these upheavals are occurring precisely now. Watts suggested that these events function as edges of the old self, trying to reaffirm its dominance. It's as if the old structure, realizing you are moving away, creates resistance to prevent its dissolution. It's not an external force sabotaging you, but internal patterns that haven't yet learned to die. And this generates a question that resonates strongly. How to move forward when the ground seems unstable and the path is not visible. The feeling of confusion grows when you realize you've lost your sense of direction. Before, even unconsciously, you followed social expectations, borrowed desires, repeated goals. Now those references have disappeared. You wake up and feel you don't know exactly what you want. You don't know where to go, who to talk to, what to look for. This emptiness can be frightening because the mind tries to urgently fill the silence, as if it needs to find some kind of emotional support, but nothing seems solid, nothing fits. Watts explained that this emptiness is the heart of the journey, the symbolic death that precedes any real rebirth. Unlikely events can also arise as moments of absolute clarity. Sometimes during a shower, a walk, or even watching the rain through the window, you feel for a few seconds a simple and profound understanding. Everything is changing because you are changing. The idea comes like a snap and, although brief, transforms your perception. These moments of lucidity act as small beacons illuminating the darkness, reminding you that confusion is a natural part of the process. But this clarity is fragile, and soon the feeling of uncertainty returns, like waves that advance and recede. During this period, you also realize that you can't share most of what you're feeling. Words seem insufficient, and the people around you don't have the same frame of reference to understand what you're going through. Attempts to explain end up generating misunderstanding or even mocking laughter. This reinforces the feeling of isolation, as if you were inhabiting a parallel reality. And the question that persists is inevitable. Does this loneliness mean I'm on the right path or just withdrawing from the world? There's another curious aspect. Certain memories from the past begin to reappear forcefully, as if they were chapters you need to review before closing a book. Things you thought you had overcome resurface, sometimes in vivid dreams, other times in unexpected emotional triggers. Watts claimed that the mind revisits the past not to punish it, but to cleanse it. Nothing can truly die without first being seen. These returns from the past can be uncomfortable, but they also show that you are going through a kind of internal reorganization, where old contents are exposed to the light to finally dissolve. And when you least expect it, you realize you're at a point where nothing old works anymore, but nothing new is yet available. It's an empty space, a silent frontier that offers no answers. And precisely for that reason, it's the most important moment of the journey. Because here, in the absence of certainties, the real possibility of the unknown is born. You feel something approaching, but you don't yet know what it is. A change, an understanding, a kind of new meaning that begins to form beyond common perception. But the revelation hasn't arrived yet. It waits, as if it were on the other side of this darkness, waiting for the right moment to emerge. At a certain point in the journey, something begins to reorganize itself within you with a force that can no longer be ignored. After traversing the void and confusion, an almost physical need arises to be true to yourself, to align yourself internally in a way that previously seemed impossible. It's as if there's a center within you that has finally awakened and begins to pull away everything that doesn't align with it. Alan Watts said that authenticity is not a philosophical ideal, but a natural reflex of someone who has finally stopped hiding from themselves. And when this force awakens, everything in life seems to move towards it, even if this generates unexpected conflicts. The first sign of tension arises when you realize you can no longer maintain certain behaviors, even those that have always been part of your social conduct. Before, you accepted certain invitations out of politeness, agreed with certain opinions to avoid conflict, and even engaged in superficial conversations to avoid seeming strange. Now, something inside you refuses. Your body no longer responds. Your words don't flow as naturally. It's as if your very presence rejects what isn't true. This creates uncomfortable situations because the people around you notice the change and try to understand what's happening, but you yourself don't yet have a clear answer. You just feel you can't go back. Tension intensifies when you start acting on this new inner strength. You begin to say no where you previously said yes. You start to distance yourself from interactions that drain your energy. You begin to express ideas you've always been afraid to speak, and this has consequences. Some people feel rejected. Others try to convince you that you're exaggerating. Some simply walk away. This is where the first major turning point occurs. You thought you would lose people by becoming a worse person, but you realize you're losing them precisely because you're becoming more genuine. This affects you in a way you didn't expect. How can truth create such difficult ruptures? At the same time, you discover that authenticity has a silent price. It makes everything simpler, but also lonelier. You realize you've spent a good part of your life trying to accommodate opinions to fit in, trying to soften your thoughts to avoid provoking reactions, trying to maintain bonds that no longer had life. Now, as you abandon these layers, the question arises, is there room in the world for who you are becoming? But Watts said that every time you choose to be honest with your own experience, something in the universe responds. However, this response rarely arrives immediately, and while it doesn't, you remain in uncertain territory, where you can no longer return to what you were, but you haven't yet found what you will be. The feeling of instability intensifies when you begin to realize that some opportunities, people, and paths that once seemed promising simply cease to make sense. Suddenly, you feel you can't continue in a job that consumes your energy without purpose. You can't persist in a friendship that feeds only on old memories. You can't stay in a relationship where you need to diminish your essence to maintain peace. Then comes the second unexpected twist. Even without clarity about the future, you begin to leave behind things you always believed you needed to keep. It's like walking across a bridge that crumbles behind you, forcing you to move forward. And it is precisely during these small renunciations that you begin to notice something curious. Your perception of life changes subtly, but constantly. Small details previously ignored begin to catch your attention. You notice gestures of generosity that previously went unnoticed. You find beauty in simple moments, like observing people on the street, feeling the sunlight on your face, or listening to a random song playing in a common place. This unexpected sensitivity doesn't mean everything has become easy. It simply means you are more present. And this presence reveals both what is beautiful and what is difficult, sometimes in the same second. Watts said that when you begin to live authentically, your own existence becomes a kind of magnet, attracting situations, thoughts, and even people that resonate with a new version of you. But this alignment isn't immediate. Before that, a period of apparent chaos is common. Plans you've been counting on begin to fall apart. Conversations you've been avoiding finally happen. Decisions you've postponed for years appear before you, demanding action. This chaos, however uncomfortable, isn't destruction. It's reorganization. It's as if life is clearing the ground for the next chapter, even if you don't see that chapter yet. The feeling of being on edge grows when you find yourself overcome by a courage you can't explain. A silent yet powerful courage. It arises from within, as if something greater were propelling you forward. even without guarantees. It is this courage that makes you face difficult conversations, close cycles, set boundaries, change habits. And despite the fear, you realize that each small act of authenticity creates an invisible opening, as if a new version of you were trying to be born through these gestures. But the biggest turning point in this phase happens when something seemingly simple occurs. You encounter a person, a situation, or even a phrase that unexpectedly reveals that you are not as alone as you believed. It could be someone who shares a similar perspective, someone who asks a question you've always wanted to hear, or a gesture that awakens a feeling of recognition within you. At that moment, a subtle understanding arises. Perhaps there are others walking similar paths, even if you haven't yet fully encountered them. This possibility rekindles something within you, a silent, almost timid hope, but enough to illuminate a few more steps. And this is where the pace intensifies. You realize that something important is about to happen. You don't know what it is, you don't know when it will come, but you feel that all this chaos, this reorganization, this authenticity forced by life is preparing you for something bigger. There's a growing premonition, an expectation that has no form but has presence. The world around you begins to seem different, as if it were tightening or expanding depending on your inner state. And without realizing it, you enter the final phase of the journey, where the transformation ceases to be merely internal and begins to manifest itself in external, real, concrete ways, something that will only be fully revealed in the next chapter. When you finally reach the last stage of this journey, something within you has already changed so profoundly that it would be impossible to return to what it was before. But the true transformation is not yet complete. It only happens when you understand that nothing you have experienced, the initial rupture, the distancing, the journey through the void, and the discovery of authenticity, makes sense if it is not translated into real life. Alan Watts said that awakening is not a lofty thought, but a different way of walking through the world. It is the simple, yet powerful decision to live in alignment with what you have silently discovered. And now, in this final stretch, you begin to understand that the entire journey was not about abandoning the world, but about rediscovering yourself in order to finally participate in it in a genuine way. What emerges at this moment is not euphoria, nor a sudden enlightenment. It is a tranquil lucidity. You feel you can finally breathe within yourself without asking permission. The sensation is similar to that of someone who has spent a long time submerged and only now has managed to emerge to the surface. The air is the same, but the way you receive it is completely new, and this lucidity opens space for a crucial understanding. There is no ready-made path. What exists is an internal axis that you have learned to recognize, and it will be your compass from now on. This axis does not shout, does not pressure, does not demand. It simply points gently in the direction of everything that is real for you. From this realization, you begin to see something that was hidden. The spiritual journey doesn't distance you from life, it brings you back to it. Now, small situations have a different meaning. A conversation with a stranger can reveal something essential. A conflict that previously would have generated irritation now seems like an opportunity to perceive your patterns. A gesture of kindness which previously went unnoticed now awakens a sincere emotion. It's as if the lenses of reality have been cleaned after years of accumulation. Watts said that awakening is returning to the obvious, but returning with a different consciousness. Nothing has changed in the external world, but everything has changed in how you perceive it. And then comes the practical part, the one that transforms perception into action. The first application of this new state is simple, but it requires courage. Stop denying what you feel. Feeling is not weakness, it's information. Every discomfort, every enthusiasm, every intuition is a signal pointing to something you need to adjust. Ignoring these signals is falling asleep again. Listen to your body, your breath, your reactions. They speak before the mind. Watts used to say that the mind creates narratives, but the body always reveals the truth. This is the first step to experiencing awakening in action. The second step is to take responsibility for your presence. You can't control others, but you can choose how you appear in the world. In every dialogue, try to be truly present. Instead of responding impulsively, observe what you want to express. Instead of giving in to pleas, ask what is real for you. Instead of going on autopilot, choose awareness. This transforms not only you, but the quality of the relationships around you. Being present is a revolutionary act in a distracted world. The third step is to cultivate environments that support your new phase. This doesn't mean abandoning everyone around you, but recognizing where your energy grows and where it dissipates. Some relationships will be reborn with greater depth. Others will end without drama. Still others will remain in the same place, but you will learn not to place expectations on them that they cannot fulfill. Learn to nurture the bonds that make your soul breathe. This is not selfishness, it is self-honesty. Watts said that you cannot be useful to the world if you are suffocating within it. The fourth step is to practice silence, not the silence that hides, but the silence that reveals. Dedicate a few minutes each day to simply observing yourself without doing anything. Sit with your thoughts, let them come and go, without resisting. This inner space creates clarity. It is there that you realize when you are straying from your center. It is there that you hear what life is trying to tell you without words. Silence is not escape, it is fundamental. All true progress is born from it. The fifth step is to act, even when afraid. Transformation doesn't happen while you're just reflecting on it. It manifests the moment you make a decision aligned with your truth. It can be a small choice, changing a habit, setting a boundary, saying something that needs to be said, ending something that hurts more than it heals. Or it can be something bigger, pursuing a new career path, moving to a new city, ending a long cycle. Whatever the decision, it needs to come from your core. Fear is natural, Watts said, but it is love for your own truth that must guide you. The sixth step is understanding that the journey doesn't end. What you've experienced so far isn't a conclusion, but a complete return to yourself. Now you walk with more awareness, more courage, more integrity. This doesn't mean you'll never feel confusion or doubt again. It means that when those moments come, you'll know they're a natural part of life's movement. Nothing is broken, nothing is wrong. You're simply learning to live awake. This is where closure takes on a much deeper tone. You realize that all the suffering you went through, the loneliness, the alienation, the disorientation, was not a punishment, but a process of refinement. You didn't lose anything important. You simply let go of what no longer supported who you truly are. And what emerges now is the most honest, simplest, and most courageous version of yourself. A version capable of creating better relationships, interpreting life with more awareness, and acting without fear of fully existing. And it's at this point that I want to speak directly to you. If this journey made sense, if it brought clarity, if it touched some part of you that was dormant, then let it be recorded. Like this video, comment, even anonymously, on the part that resonated with you the most. Share it if you feel someone needs to hear this. And if you want to continue evolving with reflections like this, subscribe to the channel. Your participation is not just a number, it's a movement of presence. And presence is exactly what transforms lives.